All right, well, let's continue on here. Our big guest for today is Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, also the author of several books, including More Guns, Less Crime and The War on Guns, and many, many more. He also writes prodigiously. He's contributed to Fox News, and Townhall.com, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, just to name a few. He joins us this morning to talk a little bit about the FBI crime data and what it means for us if that data is flawed. And he joins us right now from his beautiful place in Missoula, Montana. We were just admiring the view behind him. It's a beautiful day out there, and we welcome him to the program. Good morning, Dr. Lott.
Morning. Great to talk to you.
Oh, it's always good to talk to you, sir. I appreciate you, what you do and all the writings you got going on. Let's talk first things first. I saw the first trickles of this data coming in and the discussions. Your article recently about the FBI crime data stirred up some controversy in kind of some of the gun circles and everything else, and amongst regular people outside of that. Let's talk a little bit here about how the victimization report and the uniform crime report, two separate different entities that usually mesh up, are now starting to diverge. What you see as a statistician and as a guy who follows this, and of course as president of the Crime Prevention Research Center, let's talk about how the divergence of that is troubling and may point to other things. Let's start there.
Right. Well, I think what people don't understand completely, I think they have some idea about how law enforcement's collapsed in this country, but the collapse is kind of much more startling and much worse than I think most people realize. You take something like the largest cities in the country with over 1 million in population. We've seen this across the board, but just as an example, in the 5 years before COVID, 44% of violent crimes result in arrest. That started falling in 2020, and by 2022, it was down to 20%. So it's over a 50% drop in arrest rates from before COVID to 2022. That's a huge drop. I've never seen anything even remotely like that in the 70 years that we've had the FBI uniform crime data available for. And that has implications. One is it's made it so it's not very difficult or costly for criminals to commit crime. But, you have to, first of all, recognize that most crimes aren't reported to police. About 42% of violent crimes are reported to police, about 32% of property crimes. And so if you look at arrests as a percentage of total crimes, reported and unreported, only about 8% of violent crimes in those cities result in arrest, and only 1% of property crimes in those cities result in arrest. And of course, not everybody who's arrested gets charged. And so what you've seen is at the same time that you've seen this huge drop in arrest rates and conviction rates, it's not too surprising that you may see an increase and a large increase in crime rates that occur. Anybody who lives in a major city in the United States, even in many other places, can see that if you go to a CVS or a Walgreens store, they have everything behind glass. You have to go and call somebody over to go and open up the glass there so that you can go and shop. Then they have to stand next to you as you go and read the packages on the things there. People know that that wasn't the case a few years ago. It's not like these stores want to go and do this. It's just that things get stolen so much that they have little option. This is very costly for them to go and set up that type of protection to try to reduce theft in the stores.
Right.
And so one of the things that we've known for a long time, is not only that most violent crimes aren't reported to police, but we also know that the rate that people report crimes to the police depends upon whether or not people think there's going to be an arrest, whether they think the people who committed those crimes are going to be caught and punished. And so it's not too surprising also to find that the rate that people are reporting crimes to police has changed over the last few years. And so we have two different measures of crime. We have the FBI data on reported crimes, which you mentioned. And then we also have something called the National Crime Victimization Survey data, which you also mentioned, that surveys about 240,000 people each year, and they've been doing that for 50 years. And that's the whole reason why we do this massive survey each year, is to try to get a measure of reported and unreported crimes. And the two measures, as you say, have completely diverged. The FBI, in 2022 showed a 2% drop in reported crimes to police, but the National Crime Victimization data showed a 42% increase in violent crimes. That's a huge difference.
It's
And
huge. It's huge.
it's not anything that we've ever seen before. But it's even more troubling than that. While it's at least understandable readily why total crimes may differ from reported crimes, the other thing that's very concerning is that the National Crime Victimization Survey measure of reported crimes is going in the opposite direction of the FBI measure of reported crimes. In 2022, while FBI reported crimes fell by 2%, you had about a 29% increase in the National Crime Victimization Survey measure of reported crimes. And that raises questions why that's occurred. And unfortunately, I think there are pretty simple explanations for that too. Because of the reduction in the number of police in many areas of the country, what you see happening is that you call up the police on 911, and the dispatcher asks you if you have an emergency, which is basically means, is a criminal right there threatening you? And if the crime's already occurred, the dispatcher will say, okay, well, you can come down to the police station and report the crime. That's more difficult to report crimes than it used to be. Before they send out a police car and you could go and talk to the police. Now they're making people have to go down to the police station. And there are going to be some people who would have reported crimes previously who aren't going to do so. And the
Right.
thing is, I believe that some people think that simply calling up 911 is reporting crimes to the police. But the only way it's officially reported is if there's actually a police report filled out by the police. And so unless you go down to the police station now, you may think that you've reported crimes to the police, but it's not officially recorded there.
Right.
And there are other issues that are going on too. But again, this is something, measure of total crime and the measure of the National Crime Victimization Survey measure of reported crime used to move up and down with the FBI measure of reported crime. But that's not the case now. And
Let me just say that I see two major problems with this divergence, and I think you touch on them a little bit, and I just want to clarify from my viewpoint. I see two bad things happening with this. One, as you said, it's becoming easier for criminals to commit crimes because they're not being reported as much, they're not being investigated as much. And of course, we didn't even touch on the fact that a lot of the major metropolitan areas or blue areas have got a softer on crime approach, so they're not even being prosecuted. So it's easier for criminals to commit crime. But more insidiously, it's the fact that people are starting to believe in the institution of law enforcement less. They're starting to say, well, their cops don't care, or it's not going to matter. Why should I report it? They're not going to, I think it's dangerous from both of those perspectives. Am I wrong, or am I hitting on something here?
No, I think what you're bringing up is important. Look, I'm not sure I would go and phrase it quite that the police don't care. I mean, I think the police have become demoralized
Sure.
in large parts of the country. And that's because when they've arrested people, they're immediately released and not charged in many jurisdictions.
Right. And I meant from the perspective. I meant from the perspective of the victim saying, "Oh, the police just don't. They're
Yeah,
throwing."
I agree
Yeah,
that, right, I understand. You know, and there are other things that are going on here too. So, in many areas where you have these George Soros prosecutors, take something like a guy who's been in the news a lot recently, Alvin Bragg, in the district attorney for Manhattan in New York
right,
City. He's reduced 60% of felony charges. The vast majority of them he's reduced to misdemeanors. And one example of that is aggravated assaults. An aggravated assault is typically assault that involves a weapon of some type. But you have these district attorneys who are refusing to go and prosecute gun crimes by criminals. They'll go and prosecute gun crimes by otherwise law-abiding citizens
right,
if you make a mistake.
right,
But and they support strict gun control, ironically. But the problem is that they'll take what would have been a felony, aggravated assault, and remove the weapon part of it, and instead charge them with simple assault. And that also creates a gap between the FBI data and the national crime victimization data. And the reason is that the FBI data that they report only includes aggravated assault. It doesn't include simple assault in their numbers. And so what happens is that the National Crime Victimization Survey, which calls up 240,000 people a year, will go and ask you a long series of like 40 questions about when the crime occurred, who the criminal was, the characteristics of the criminal, what happened, and then finally, did you report the crime? And so they'll go through and they'll tell the surveyor, yeah, I was assaulted. Yes, the person had a weapon. And the surveyor will classify that as an aggravated assault then, because that's what happened. And but yet the FBI data won't include that as an aggravated assault because the district attorney refused to charge the person with using a weapon in that
right.
case. And so that's just another example for why the FBI data on reported crimes could be going in the opposite direction of the national crime victimization data on that.
Dr. John Lott is our guest. This brings us right up to the break, which is good. When we come back, we're going to talk about other reasons why this data may be diverging and what does it mean from his perspective as he looks at it. What are his concerns about the continuing reporting discrepancies here? What does it mean for the country? What does it mean for crime prevention? And more. It's Dr. John Lott, the president of the CPRC, the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can find out more about them at crimeresearch.org. We'll continue with more and Dr. John Lott right after this. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the break. Dr. John Lott is our guest with this. You mentioned Alvin Bragg, and I mean, oof, man, that guy's got so much to answer for right now. The machinations and the mental gymnastics that are required for some of the things that he's been doing, and of course, he's the mastermind behind the prosecution of Trump right now. And although I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump, I am just aghast at what has happened to him in regards to this court case. And I think the backlash from this is definitely going to be more than they anticipated. But, Bragg and others have been, they're trying to basically, again, twist the law into some semblance of what they believe is right or the truth, or this utopian society where we don't prosecute people for felonies. We plea it down to misdemeanors, as you point out, and it's causing chaos across the whole country right now.
Yeah, well, it is pretty amazing what's happened with Trump. When I was chief economist for the U.S. Sentencing Commission in Washington, I must have read, I don't know, 1,000 trial transcripts, criminal trial transcripts. Now, admittedly, these were federal cases, but it's shocking to see what's happened in this case. I mean, I've never, in all the cases that I read, I never saw anything remotely similar to the way that this case has been handled. Everything from the instructions to the jury, that's just kind of absolutely bizarre to say that you don't have to, believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the person who you're charging with the crime committed the crime. That you can pick between 3 different offenses, none of them which you have to believe beyond a reasonable doubt, just the preponderance of the evidence. So the difference is, are you like 95% certain that somebody did something, or are you 51% certain that somebody did something? And, there are several different ones you can have here, and some of you can pick one, and some of you can pick another, and some of you pick another one that's there.
And you don't have to say which one. You don't have to say, just as long as they're all unanimous in picking one of them, it's, different, one of the different ones. It doesn't matter. They don't all have to pick the same one. We'll just decide it's pick and choose. Throw a dart and tell me where it lands.
Right. I mean, it's just unconscionable what's happened in this case. And there's, the experts that Trump wanted to have testify, not being allowed to testify. It's just crazy stuff. The prosecutor being able to go and claim over and over and over again that campaign finance laws were violated. It's just it's just crazy stuff. And the judge should have been recused. The fact that his daughter makes millions and millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars from being able to go and work for Democratic candidates who are using this trial to go and fundraise is just, I mean, one doesn't even know where to start with
Right.
all bizarre things that are there.
Oh, well, I said it to some of my friends and my wife last night. I said, look, this is going to be appealed. I believe that when it, maybe there's a change of venue, or I think it will eventually be overturned, but the damage is done. This is what they wanted to do. But I think the backlash might be something that they don't necessarily expect. I mean, this is purely political. They had to manufacture stuff as far as trying to connect the dots in these 3 different potential violations of law and everything else. One of them was like, it wasn't only a felony if it gets to that. That's why they kept hammering on the violation of election laws, because that's the only felony they could get in there if they did that. And it's a super stretch. Many legal experts have said this is kind of crazy, but here we are. It's all about the politics, and that might come back to backlash on them, I think.
Well, I mean, I hope you're right. We'll have to see. You can look at things like election betting odds, and what you see is that the race tightened up a little bit last night after the conviction came down. It wasn't a huge amount, but I think it's probably the best snapshot that we have by looking at the rate that people are willing to bet on the outcome of the election. And what you find is that there was about a 7 percentage point swing in Biden's favor. Trump was still ahead, but not by as much as he was beforehand. So,
right.
He was basically ahead by about 9 percentage points, whereas before he was ahead by 16 percentage points in terms of likelihood of winning.
Right. Well, but at the same time, his website crashed. $100 million raised overnight. So, right. I mean, I think it's going to motivate the base more than anything else. It's going to be interesting to watch. I don't normally cover national politics, but I'm fascinated by what's going on with this, and it's fascinating to watch. But let's get back into the UCR and the victimization report and the divergence and what does it mean. We're continuing right now. Dr. John Lott, the Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Yep. It's not your daddy's talk radio, long form, in-depth stuff, and good conversations with folks like our current guest, Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can find him at crimeresearch.org. Of course, he also writes for Townhall, the Wall Street Journal. He's author of several books, including More Guns, Less Crime. We've just been talking about the Uniform Crime Report, the UCR from the FBI, and the victimization, the National Victimization Report, and how normally they kind of go hand in hand. They rise and fall with each other, and they've been kind of joined at the hip. But recently, we've seen this huge divergence, not just by a few points, but by, exponentially large amounts. And so the bigger question here is, Dr. Lott, you've touched on maybe one or two of the reasons why it's starting to diverge. But what do you see as being the major reasons for the break in this connectivity between the two reports right now?
Well, I think it's the ones that we've kind of talked about with regard to the complete collapse of law enforcement in many places in this country. Law enforcement through policing, through district attorneys, through judges. We had defunding the police that occurred in 2020 and 2021. Places like New York City cut its police budget by $1 billion a year. Places like Chicago cut the number of police officers that they had by like 400 positions in just 2020. Those are huge changes that are there. You have district attorneys, as we've been talking about, who have been refusing to prosecute violent criminals or, completely refusing to prosecute many property crimes. And for a few years there, you had liberal judges releasing, in many urban areas, half or even 2/3 of the inmates, even though, everybody who's in jail there pretty much is between 18 and early 30s. These were not people at risk for COVID. We're not talking about people over 65 or over 70. And we knew that in 2020. And yet these liberal judges were using this as kind of an excuse for mass release of inmates from these local jails. So it's not too surprising that you would have increases in violent crime. Now, I know in the last year or so, many of these same police departments have tried to go back and hire people. But you have massive retirements that have occurred also. You lose somebody that has 10 or 15 or 20 years of experience. Simply going and hiring somebody who's been on the job for 6 months or a year doesn't replace them. And also they've lowered the standards for the people that they've been hiring. But somebody, even if they've been on the job for a year, they're not going to be as effective as a police officer as somebody who was there for 15 years. And there are other changes that have occurred. There have been big paperwork requirements imposed on the police for every time they go and talk to somebody, they have to go and fill out a form. In California, for example, when you go and you pull somebody over for a traffic violation, now police officers have to fill out a very detailed form that asks questions like, what is the sexual orientation of the person that you pulled over? Now, how in the heck could there be a bias there in terms of who you pulled over by knowing that?
Right.
The officer is not allowed to ask the person what their sexual orientation is. The officer has to guess what it is and put it down on the form. And it's just completely nutsy waste of time type stuff that they have to do. And if they actually give somebody a citation, they have to fill out even more of these forms. So it's crazy stuff. But what it does is it makes it so that police officers are reticent to go and pull over people for traffic stops. There's been a huge drop in the rate that people who are violating traffic rules are pulled over. And my own guess is that people, if they're not worried about being caught by the police, are going to drive more recklessly than they would have driven otherwise. And that means more accidents and more people hurt and more property damage that's there. If they don't have to worry about speeding, if they don't have to worry about running stop signs or whatever, they're going to drive more recklessly. And so, but that's just one example. There, effectively, you've reduced the number of police officers even more than simply the count on the number of police officers because of these paperwork forms. Chicago has had their rules for a while now, but in Chicago, every time a police officer goes and talks to somebody, they have to fill out forms, which take about an hour on average. And so, and what has that done? It's made it so that police officers don't want to talk to somebody, because if you go and talk to four people in the morning, that's basically your whole afternoon is taken up filling out paperwork that's there. That's effectively reducing the number of police officers that you have on the street. And so there have been lots of changes that have occurred. Biden, has been a big disappointment on this because he's refused to go and criticize these district attorneys. He's refused to go and criticize at all, even one time, the district attorneys or the judges in this case. He had come out for defunding the police during the 2020 election, though about a year or so afterwards, he began to talk about providing more funds for the police. But, it doesn't, it's only part of it. And as we talked about before, unless the rest of the legal system works, you're going to be demoralizing the police officers. To somebody like Biden, the entire way of talking about crime has been, or at least 98% of it has been gun control.
Right.
He's been a complete disaster on the gun issue. First of all, 92% of violent crime has nothing to do with guns. And the way you reduce gun crime is the same way you reduce violent crime generally, is you make it risky for criminals to go and commit crimes with higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences. But Biden doesn't seem to understand that. The types of gun control that he's had, you look at his zero tolerance policy on guns. In that case, any paperwork mistake, no matter how trivial, no matter how inconsequential, he's used to put firearms dealers out of business. He's
right.
Middle of last year, when they were just ramping this up, had literally put thousands of gun dealers out of business. I'll give you one example. A guy in northern Texas, 17 and 18 years ago, he had transposed two letters in one word each in two different forms. And the Obama administration had looked at it. Hardly people who were kind of favorable to gun ownership had looked at it and said, this is inconsequential, gave him a small fine, and closed the books. Well, he's made no other typos in any forms for the next 17 years. The Biden administration has gone out there and had to reopen these two cases from 17 and 18 years ago in order to justify taking away his firearms license. So, those are the types of people. Biden wants to talk about rogue gun dealers who are selling guns to criminals out of the back of their stores. That's not what they're talking about.
Right.
If they have evidence of that, fine. Go and prosecute them. Take away their license if you have evidence of that. But instead, they're going after people who make a tiny, completely inconsequential paperwork typing mistake.
Right.
And so,
and we've seen this before on the program. We've handled people like Red's Trading Post in Twin Falls, Idaho, where they were under the gun from the ATF for putting Y instead of yes, or N instead of no, or abbreviating the county name or something like that. And they were getting dinged for things like that they easily corrected, but immediately put them in the crosshairs. That was 15 years ago, and they're still fighting those kind of things out. Like you said, it's ridiculous, minor paperwork violations that are not intentional and not criminal in nature, but they treat them as such. We're down to the last 3 minutes here or so, Dr. Lott. The problem with the divergence here, one of the other problems is, of course, people can then misuse some of this data and from the FBI and basically say, oh, this is working or that is working. What does it mean for the American people in the long run, as if this divergence continues, and what does it show for the American people?
Well, I mean, you're right about people using this. The media keeps on having headlines saying violent crime is falling or crime is falling, but people seem to think that mistakenly think crime's going up. And, it's just amazing to me, the links that the media will go on this. I kind of thought having a piece in the Wall Street Journal, which is the biggest newspaper in the country, would kind of stop some of that. But you have PolitiFact that just came out with a fact check on this stuff, saying that, well, the national crime victimization data shows the lowest crime, and you go back 50 years, and the crime was still high at that point. And, because they want to go and protect Biden, because Biden's been making the claim that violent crime is the lowest in 50 years. And I wrote the people there, and I said, look, you go back from 2021 to 2022, there was a 42% increase in the national crime victimization measure of crime. How can you say the most recent data is the lowest it's been in 50 years when just from 2021 to 2022, there's a 42% increase, or from 2021 to 2020 or 2020 to 2021, there was a 43% increase.
Yeah, it's madness.
You have to go back just a couple of years to see much lower rates than we have right now, but they refuse to fix it. And when Trump came out and talked about the high rate of violent crime, you had USA Today come out with 2 fact check articles the same day saying that he was wrong about that.
Right. No, it's going to be politicized. You can tell that's pretty much the way it is with everything these days. And it is frightening. We didn't get a chance to talk about this shooting in New York City. We got just a couple minutes here. We ran over the top of the hour. We're into the commercial break now, but let's just quickly. This to me is amazing. You have a bodega owner who's a concealed carry permit holder. He and his brother are in the liquor store running it. They get robbed. They catch the thieves red-handed. It turns into an altercation, spills out onto the sidewalk. One of the perpetrators is assaulting his brother. He goes to defend his brother, has a pistol in his hand at this point. The gun goes off. The criminal gets shot. They're both charged. Both criminals are charged, but then they charge the gun owner with a crime that is, I mean, he's the one that's getting the worst end of this deal, and he's just defending himself. And again, the prosecutor here is going to make an example of him. This is just some crazy stuff.
Right. So the criminal in this case, who left the store, came back, assaulted the employee brother that was there, moved away, came back and started kicking and hitting him again. He's just charged with petty theft. They didn't even charge him with assault, which is unbelievable. I mean, the guy was punching and kicking the other person. The reason why the brother came over is Francisco Valerio, who's charged with this. He's facing 7 years in prison. But the person who engaged in the assault is facing a maximum of 364 days in prison. It's just crazy that they can't even charge the attacker with assault.
Yeah, no, it's and again, I think this is kind of a big middle finger to gun owners everywhere. Here's a guy who's licensed. He's got his concealed carry. He jumped through all the hoops. He's in his own place of business. He's trying to protect his brother and, or his employee. His brother was his employee, and from all this,
But
and
you don't
well,
even need to focus on the gun issue. You have Jose Alba. People probably heard about this
right.
bodega worker who was viciously assaulted by an ex-con, and who, in self-defense, used a knife to go and protect himself. He ended up in jail for a while before Alvin Bragg, because of the negative publicity, finally dropped the charges against the individual. And then you have somebody like Daniel Perry, who didn't even have a weapon of any type, was just simply an ex-Marine who had taught restraining methods to other Marines and had used a chokehold on this individual to restrain him because he was threatening to kill people on the subway. And so, in order to stop him from hurting or attacking people there, Daniel Perry had gone forward, along with a couple other people on the train there, subway, and restrained the person. And he died there. But, he's still facing trial. So there you have, people who in self-defense or in the protection of others hadn't even used a gun, were harassed and punished by the criminal justice system. But the people who committed the crimes, who are committing crimes, the criminals, are not being prosecuted.
Right, right. And this is what I said when I said that people are starting to lose confidence in the justice and the law enforcement system. It's not just the fact that they think that the cops don't care. They just don't, they're starting to falter in their faith in the system. That's a
Right.
dangerous thing. I mean, that leads back to, we talk about the Irish democracy where you start to have laws and things where people just think they're ridiculous and they stop believing in them and they stop. I mean, the whole thing is based on the faith and confidence of the people. And if the
Right.
people stop believing in the system, that's when you get chaos. And that's kind of where we're headed right now.
Right. Well, and also you have the politicization of law enforcement. You go and look at what's happening to Trump right now. I mean, the Biden administration has its fingerprints all over it. The number 3 guy at the Department of Justice, which is a very prominent position, leaves that position to go and take a line prosecutor job in Alvin Bragg's office there. I mean, that's like an incredible demotion, but he was doing that in order to go and put their best guys in for prosecuting Trump there. You
Right.
have all the meetings that have occurred between Fannie in Fulton County, Georgia, and the guy, Wade guy that she had that went up to the White House to go and meet with them about the prosecution that they were doing in Georgia there. You have Jack Smith, a prosecutor who has, been raked over the coals by the Supreme Court before because of his abusive attacks on Republicans, like former governor of Virginia. Unanimously, the Supreme Court threw out the case that he had there, McDonald. He's the guy that they put in there, and probably illegally violating the rules for who could be a special prosecutor. It's just amazing. And those things, like the convictions for Trump this week, I think kind of hurt people's views on law enforcement in other ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, it erodes the confidence in the nation and in the systems we have, and that's a dangerous precedent to set. Dr. John Lott, thank you, my friend. As always, it's good to talk with you. Thank you for all the work you do, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for being part of it today.
Well, thanks for being there. People can find more at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
All right. Thank you, Dr. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center.